Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I am an archaeologist, in case you couldn't tell by my hat. All of us remember learning the rhyme when we were in school. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue to remind us and remember when Columbus reached the New World. We were taught that before the Spanish discovered the New World, only indigenous Americans had set foot on North American soil. However, the discovery of the site of Meadows in Newfoundland in 1960 proved that the Vikings had actually beaten the Spanish here by many centuries. When they came and how long they stayed for are just a few of the questions that the discovery posed that have not yet been answered. We know only too well why the Spanish were here and what they did. Perhaps the cruelty and sheer volume of what happened when the Spanish arrived is what has led to this unshakable belief that Columbus and thus Spain was first. Or maybe it's just that it lends itself more to the poetic form than in the 11th century, the Vikings sailed across the sea. The Vikings were in this territory in the 11th century. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue. The site does in fact date from the 11th century, hence my awful rhyme. It was discovered by married Norwegian archaeologist duo Helge Ingstad and Anne Stein Ingstad in 1960. The book they wrote about their discovery is called The Viking Discovery of America, and a book about the archaeological lives of this adventurous couple is called A Grand Adventure. This is a great read if you want to learn more about the site of Meadows, or if you just want to feel bad about what you and your romantic partner have accomplished together. The site of Meadows consists of 8 turf timber structures built in the same style as those found in Norse Greenland and Iceland from around the same time. Beyond the structures, there were also myriad artifacts recovered, and these proved that it was indeed a Viking settlement. Many of the artifacts were made of soapstone, of which there's a great prevalence in Northern Europe, and these were used by the Vikings to make pots, pans, jewelry, spindle whorls for making cloth. They were also used in the building of their houses. Other artifacts were made of bronze, and most importantly, iron slag was found. Iron slag is created by the remnants of metallurgy, so creating metal tools, or most likely with the Vikings, weapons. The Vikings at the time were prolific metallurgists, not so much the Native Americans. Another one for definitely a Viking settlement. What's more, the iron archaeologists have discovered that the iron actually came from that area. It was not brought over from the Vikings' original homeland. It's clear that whatever happened at this site happened over a long period of time, as this was clearly set up for long-term habitation with its smithy and standing structures and basic setup of a community, not just a campsite. But it still begs the question, why were they here and who were they? For that, we must turn to the Vinland Sagas. The Vinland Sagas are 2 Icelandic texts that were written in the 13th century about events that supposedly happened in the 10th and 11th centuries. The 2 texts are the Saga of Eric the Red and the Saga of the Greenlanders. Both stories recount journeys to Vinland. Essentially, they are descriptions of Norse exploration of the Americas. They are at times contradictory and unreliable, but they're still thought to be actual tellings of events that actually happened, not just mythologies. Although they were perhaps changed through a many years long game of telephone where facts may have morphed, as tends to happen with oral histories, which was very common for the Norse. There's much debate as to why the land in these sagas is referred to as Vinland. One of the beliefs is that it is in reference to grapevines that Leif Erikson discovered when he came to North America. Eric the Red and Leif Erikson are also names that I remember from school, although they didn't get rhymes. Also, food for thought. Should we make some more? Eric the Red. No, we have more important things to do. Anyway, through the texts, archaeologists have been able to create a credible timeline of Viking adventures, and this, of course, sparked a very long adventure of its own, that of finding the supposed North American Viking outpost. And thus, the excitement over the discovery of the site of Lance aux Meadows. Here at last was proof that the Vinland saga was correct. The Vikings had indeed come to North America and beaten other Europeans by hundreds of years. However, there is actually still some debate as to whether the site is the actual Vinland or just another outpost, one of many, and we still need to keep looking for the actual Vinland from the stories. A lot of that has to do with agriculture in certain areas. I won't bore you with that, but there is still some debate. And theories abound about where the real Vinland might be on the coast of North America. So there was clearly a rabid fascination with where the Vinland of the sagas might be. And whenever the people want something bad enough, someone will show up to give it to them. Whether that's wanting to prove that Japanese people had an ancient presence, or the Bible is real. Do you see where I'm going with this? That's right, folks. We have our very own Viking hoax. All the best archaeological stories have one. In 1936, a Canadian prospector by the name of Eddie Dodd claimed to have found real 100% grade A Viking artifacts on his land. And here it was, the proof that scientists have been looking for years. The Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot on North American soil. And, like all these other con men we've learned about, this con man managed to pull the wool not just over a few archaeologists' eyes who confirmed the find, but the entire Royal Ontario Museum, which proudly backed the discovery. Much like Shinichi Fujimura and his Hand of God in Japan, Dodd preyed on the archaeological desires of the time, which was to find proof of Viking presence pre-Spain. And when we want something badly enough, we'll tend to believe anything that proves the thing we want. The hoax lasted for decades until 1956, when it was finally proven to be false. Funnily enough, this was only a few years before the actual finding of evidence of Viking presence in North America was found at Lance aux Meadows. Unfortunately, the museum, the curator, and all the archaeologists who had lent their name to this discovery were left to pick up the pieces of what was now a rather tarnished career. A pattern we have seen in every hoax we have studied. If you want to learn more about this story, I recommend the book Beardmore by Douglas Hunter. Now, the goal of the Vikings in all their explorations was conquest, something that obviously did not occur on this continent. So what was their purpose here all those centuries ago? And how long were they here for? According to recent information, the Vikings could have been here from anywhere from the 18th century all the way to the 13th century at any given time for any amount of time. And even more interestingly, Lance aux Meadows may have been a shared space with Native Americans, whether that means they lived there at the same time, or there was crossover during different years, or more likely skirmishes of some kind, although I like to think it was this. There is some DNA evidence that there was some mixing, so maybe. All that aside, these were peoples, and this was a land that were never colonized or overpowered by the Vikings. Why? Was it a conscious choice by the Vikings not to do so, or did the Native Americans do something, whether through violence or some other means, convince the Vikings not to colonize them? The belief I found most was that the Native Americans actually proved to be such a formidable enemy that not only did they convince the Vikings not to colonize them, but they convinced them to never come back again. They truly never returned. Evidence at the site proves that L'Anse aux Meadows was most likely a hub, with explorers leaving it to explore further south. Does that mean we will ever find more sites where the Vikings stopped and stayed for a long enough period of time to leave traces? Maybe. L'Anse aux Meadows tends to pose more questions than answers, but perhaps answers to some of these myriad questions posed by this famous site will be answered sometime soon. Maybe one of you will answer them. Most likely me, because of that. After all, answering questions is what archaeologists do best, even when those answers unlock 100 more questions.